In our last episode, we saw the renaming of Abram to Abraham and Sarah to Sarai, and a promise given that Sarah would conceive a child, as well as other promises God made. And Abraham, and his descendants would now have to be circumcised as a portion of their deal or their covenant with God. And at the end of the chapter, Abraham and all of the servants and all the people of his household and his son were all circumcised, and that's kind of where that chapter ended. So now we're picking up in Genesis 18:1. Now the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of the terebinth of Manor, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. So Abram is chilling, relaxing on a hot day, and the oaks of the terebinth of Manor, that's that place that we kept seeing show up. It showed up when they were first trying to get into the land of Canaan, and then when they got to the land of Canaan, it kind of showed up there. So he must have been dwelling in that general vicinity, and he's sitting there, and the Lord appears. So that's pretty exciting. Genesis 18:2. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men stood at a distance from him. He ran from the tent to meet them and bowed himself to the ground, prostrating himself to the ground. The way I like to imagine this verse is that it's like one of those ridiculously hot days where you're just getting cooked. And back in those days, back in the day, back in my time, we didn't have air conditioning. There was no air conditioning. There was none of that fancy magic of electricity. So he's probably sitting there roasting away. And I mean, he's probably in the Middle East, right? The land of Canaan. A nice, hot place. And he's like 100 years old. So he's just like cooking. He's an old man cooking in the heat, sitting there in the heat. And then behold, these 3 dudes show up, and he sees that the Lord is there. He's one of the 3 guys there. At least that's the way I interpret it. And then it's just like, the life comes to him, the life back into his eyes. He's like, wait a second. And then he just gets up and just has that enthusiasm, that living life vigor being brought forth into him, like just feeling alive again. It would be the same as, I guess, you turn on the AC, you have a cold beverage, you sit around for a little bit, and you just have the energy come back to you. But this would just be such a shock. And it was probably just a tremendous, emotional experience, and physiologically as well, that it was like the life came back into him. He felt young again and was just brought alive by this emotional experience of seeing the Lord. Getting up, running down to go see him, and prostrating himself before the Lord. That's the way I visualize it. I could be completely wrong with that, but that's just kind of what I get from this text. This it's quite a scene. It's incredible. Genesis 18:3. And he said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant, I beg of you." So he's just calling out to the Lord. He sees him there. He's prostrating before him. And he doesn't want him to just walk by and forget about him. And he's not going to. Genesis 18:4. Let a little water be brought, and you may wash your feet and recline and rest yourselves under the tree. So he is offering to look after them. He's going to give them a nice cold drink, clean their feet. Remember, in those days, they didn't have Nike shoes. They didn't have closed-toe shoes. Your feet would get dirty or whatever, and you'd be walking whatever, and it'd just be kind of messy. So cleaning your feet was a very big thing back then. And I think in a lot of ways it was almost like mandatory, so you didn't get crazy foot fungus and just all that weird nastiness. I mean, obviously that's not going to happen to the Lord. I mean, he is the Lord. But it was kind of a cultural thing. He's like, oh, let's clean your feet up, have a nice break, sit down there, I'll get you a nice drink, get underneath the tree, get out of the sun, right? Just wanting to look after him, wanting to make sure that if the Lord is going to be visiting him, that he is providing the best service within his capabilities to the Lord. Genesis 18:5. And I will bring a morsel, a mouthful of bread to refresh and sustain your hearts before you go on further, for that is why you have come to your servant. And he replied, do as you have said. So we have the Lord here, and he's taken up Abraham on his offer. He's going to go chill out by that tree and have his cold drink and have his feet be cleaned. Genesis 18:6. So Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, get ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and bake cakes. This is one of those great verses in the Bible. Just you can see the excitement of Abraham, and he's running into his tent. Goes and sees Sarah. Quick, we need to make this food. We have guests. The level of hospitality, right? This is an awesome verse. This is just exciting. You get to see Abraham, this old man, getting up in this hot weather, running into his tent, calling for his wife to make some food for their guests, to provide the best hospitality possible. I'm sure she was probably stunned. She was probably lazing around a little bit on a nice hot day like this, not working too hard. She's probably wondering what's going on. Who could possibly be here that would get her husband, who is an old man who's probably seen it all. But it doesn't end there. Genesis 18:7. And Abram ran into the herd and brought a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the young man to butcher. Then Abram hastened to prepare it. He is pulling all the stops. He's not holding back at all. He's doing the best he can to provide the best level of hospitality he can. Hospitality? Hospitality. Genesis 18:8. And he took curds and milk and the calf which he had made ready and set it before the men. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. This verse is interesting. Well, at least I find it interesting. There's a verse, I think it's in Exodus or Deuteronomy, where it's thou shalt not boil the kid in his mother's milk. And there's this idea of cooking an animal in something that is made for sustenance, right? And there's this kind of a weirdness to that as being a forbidden food. And I'm not entirely sure if that's what he's got going on here. But then again, they didn't have the law at this point in time. That doesn't come till later. And a lot of the ways that dietary laws are ways of separating the people of Abraham from the rest of the world, to keep them separate and distinct. So maybe there is no significance to that as far as what we got going on here. But it is kind of interesting, and I'm sure from the Jewish perspective, this is a very interesting verse. But from the conventional Gentile sense, it's like, well, cool, he's making the best meal that he can to provide for the Lord, and he's standing there, standing behind, making sure everything is good and up to snuff. It's almost like a waiter at a high-end restaurant. Would you like any more Parmesan on that? Do you need a refill of this? Just standing there like a good servant to the Lord, ready to do what is needed. But it's not because he's commanded. It's because of his love for the Lord and wanting to do the best he can for him. It's not his job. It's his relationship. Genesis 18:9. And they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is here in the tent. He's out there being the good waiter that he is, looking after the guests. And the guests are wondering where his wife is. You know, she should be a part of this as well. That this isn't something that's exclusively for him, that it's something for her to partake in as well. Genesis 18:10. The Lord said, I will surely return to you when the season comes round. And behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening and heard it at the tent door, which was behind him. So Sarah is not out there with Abraham at this point in time, but she's eavesdropping through the door of the tent. Maybe the door of the tent was just a simple layer of cloth or fabric, so I'm sure she could hear with full fidelity, and she was able to hear exactly what was being said. Genesis 18:11. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in years. It had ceased to be with Sarah as with young women. She was past the age of childbearing. Post-menopause, right? Genesis 18:12. Therefore Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I become aged, shall I have pleasure and delight, my lord husband, becoming old also? So she laughed to herself with the news that she would have a child. I mean, it sounds reasonable, right? She's an old lady. Abraham was like 100 years old, and she wasn't far behind, so it's understandable to believe that she had some skepticism to the idea of childbirth, especially when she was never able to have a child before this. This part here is a little bit funny. Genesis 18:13. And the Lord asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I really bear a child when I am so old? This part's kind of funny because the Lord's reaction, he obviously knows why she was laughing. She thought it was impossible that for this old lady to conceive, right? So he's kind of pinning it on Abraham a bit. It's like, why is your wife laughing? As if Abraham has never told her of what God has promised to him and promised to her. It's almost as if she didn't know of the promises, or it could be the other dynamic, a level of doubt or insecurities. Yet I think it would be reasonable to assume that after such a long amount of time and never having any form of conception occurring, that she can laugh, but her laughter is really a reflection of her lack of faith and understanding in the promises that God has made to her as well as to Abraham. Genesis 18:14. Is there anything too hard or too wonderful for the Lord? At the appointed time, when the season for her delivery comes around, I will return to you, and Sarah shall have borne a son. Is anything too wonderful? Well, I think if God can create the heavens and the earth and can set all of this stuff going, that the idea of making an old lady produce a child shouldn't be that crazy of a scenario, even though in many ways it seems more exciting than the creations of the heavens and the earth, for we know nothing outside of that, but the procreation process of the human race is something that we are much more intimate and have a deeper knowledge of and relate to it on a more regular basis. So maybe not. I don't think it's too wonderful, but I could understand the apprehension. And then we have a promise of when the delivery is going to happen for the child, as well as when he's going to come back, and that's pretty cool too. It's always good to know when the Lord's going to come back. Genesis 18:15. Then Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So she got caught in the act laughing. And the funny thing is, too, in the previous chapter, maybe it was the chapter before, when it talked about naming of the child, he said, name him Isaac, which means laughter. And then we have this scenario here with Sarah. So it's like, was that a prophecy that Sarah would be laughing? And that's why the child would be named after it? I think that might be the case. And that's kind of funny and cute. She also wouldn't be the first person to lie to the Lord. Genesis 18:16. The men rose up from there, faced towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them. to bring them on the way. So he's just kind of escorting them on their way out, so to speak. Genesis 18:17, and the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham, my friend and servant, what I am going to do?" This section here starts up branching into another topic and another subject, and I do kind of wonder of the spacing here and the layout of the chapters, but this is kind of the beginning of another process. The Lord has a good relationship with Abraham, and he needs to make a decision whether or not he wants to tell him what his plan is and what he's going to do. Genesis 18:18. Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth shall be blessed through him and shall bless themselves by him. This is a continuation of the declaration that was in the previous line and sort of a reasoning for the following actions. Genesis 18:19. For I have known, chosen, acknowledged him as my own, so that I may teach and command his children and the sons of his house after him to keep the way of the Lord and to do what is just and righteous, so that the Lord may bring Abraham what he has promised him. So the Lord is going to do something pretty big here, something pretty intense. And right now he is in the deliberation of telling Abraham, or not telling Abraham. He's going to end up telling Abraham. But I think this preamble here, this setup, is to kind of show just the scale and scope and intensity of what is going on. This is not some minor little thing. This is kind of a big deal. Genesis 18:20. And the Lord said, because of the shriek of the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is exceedingly grievous. 18:21. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether as vilely and wickedly as the cry of it which has come to me, and if not, I will know. When it comes to the cries of suffering, when people cry out to the Lord is able to hear that. I think some of what this line is saying is that there are many people in Sodom and Gomorrah that are suffering. He's going down to investigate the circumstance. I do think he would know before going down there in the conventional sense, but it's almost like a more of a poetic statement. That he knows how bad it is, but he's going there to investigate, to kind of get a first-hand account of what is going on there. Genesis 18:22. Now the two men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. So we had three people originally, right, when they came to go see Abraham. The one was the Lord, and the two that were with him were the angels of the Lord, the messengers. So these two messengers, they were going to go towards Sodom. And Abraham stood in front of the Lord, and he is kind of looking to make an intercessory. Abraham knew what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, or we can see in this next line, Genesis 18:23, and Abraham came close and said, you will destroy the righteous, those upright and in right standing with God, together with the wicked. So Abraham is asking it as a question. Would he destroy the wicked with the righteous? This is due to Abraham knowing there was just a lot of wickedness in Sodom and Gomorrah, and that God previously, before the flood, kind of destroyed a lot of wickedness. Now we proceed into our negotiations. Abraham is a very good negotiator, and his descendants are also known for being very good negotiators. Genesis 18:24. Suppose there are in the city 50 righteous. Will you destroy the place and not spare it for the sake of the 50 righteous in it? So Abraham, he's starting off his negotiation with 50 people. There's 50 righteous in there. Spare the city is what he's saying. He's trying to, some of it is his negotiation, but there's the other aspect to it, which is him kind of coming to a greater understanding of God and the ways of God and how God operates when it comes to the amounts necessary for judgment to be spilled over. Genesis 18:25. Far be it for you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as do the wicked. Far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth execute judgment and do righteously. This is an extension of what Abraham was saying before about the judging the wicked with the righteous, or the righteous with the wicked, I should say, in that it seems wrong for the righteous to receive the penalty of the wicked. And this makes sense, and I think I would certainly agree with that. And it seems that God agrees with it as well, for in our next chapter, verse 18:26, and the Lord said, if I find in the city of Sodom 50 righteous, upright, and in right standing with God, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham and God are on the same page here, that if there's 50 righteous, the city will be spared. Genesis 18:27. Abraham answered, behold, now I who am but dust and ashes have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. He's making himself small, and he's like, just one more thing he would like to say before the Lord goes and does his judgment to the city. He's making himself small, but at the same time he's interceding. He is asking the Lord for something. Genesis 18:28. If 5 of the 50 righteous shall be lacking, you will destroy the whole city for the lack of the 5, he said. If I find 45, I will not destroy it. So Abraham is asking for 45, and God's saying, okay, 45, we're not going to do it. Abraham is the master negotiator. I just kind of like the way that he keeps pushing the envelope a little bit more, just to try to help as many people as he can. But then again, God is righteous, and would God really be righteous if he was destroying the righteous with the wicked? So, I mean, you got two sides to it that way, right? God is good, God is great. Is he really gonna just wipe out the righteous? I don't know. Genesis 18:29. And Abraham spoke to him again and said, suppose only 40 shall be found there. And he said, I will not do it for 40's sake. So here we go. Abraham is just rolling down the numbers to find out what that critical point is, in which the wicked and the righteous will be judged the same. What small amount, what remnant would be needed to be in the city to prevent God and God's judgment on the city? How many righteous? He's walking it back. He started at 50, he took it down to 45, and now he's down to 40. He's just trying to walk that tight rope to see where that line is. Genesis 18:30. Then Abraham said to him, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again. Suppose only 30 shall be found there. And he answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. So now we're down to 30. He did a bit bigger of a jump, went from 40 to 30, so this time it was a jump of 10, but he's just working his way down there, just trying to find the limit. And he's just one more thing. Just don't be angry, Lord. He just needs to ask, right? And he's just kind of tiptoeing around, doesn't want to say anything. He doesn't want to rock the boat, so to speak, but still wants to see. Genesis 18:31. And Abraham said, behold, I have taken it upon myself to speak again to the Lord. Suppose only 20 shall be found there. And the Lord replied, I will not destroy it for 20's sake. Abraham's got him down to 20. Master negotiator here. Genesis 18:32. And he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again only this. Suppose 10 righteous people shall be found there. And the Lord said, I will not destroy it for the 10's sake. So he's worked his way all the way down to 10. Genesis 18:33. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And here we are at the end of the chapter, and it looks like Abraham has talked God down to 10 people. But we'll see in the next chapter that it's even less than that, and it kind of sets up a pattern that God cannot judge the innocent with the guilty. He needs to get the innocent out before he can perform the judging act. I only bring that up here in case you don't watch the next video. So till next time, stay awesome.